So in this video we are going to talk about SQL injection. Now before we get into the injection part, we need to have some understanding of SQL and how it works, and an understanding of the structure behind the language. So I have a little drawing which is here. So if you imagine that you're the user, sat on your computer, you've got the browser open, you've got the web server here. So let's say you've gone on a website that sells furniture. Now, one of the items that's on there that you quite like is, let's say, a table. So what happens is, in a database, every single item or piece of furniture that that website or that shop has is listed inside the database. So what will happen is you will click on table, let's say, or you will type in table into their website. That will send a request to the web server to say that you want to look at table. Then you'll have this SQL query here which will run to the database, and then it will return the table, bring it back to the web server, which will then bring it back to you. So this statement here says select all, so the little star symbol means all, so select all from the table name, where the column name equals the user input. So the table name could be anything that the developers choose for it. So it could be, let's say, items or furniture even. So they could call their table furniture. Then within that table you have columns and you have rows. So each item will, or the information or the details of the furniture will be in the rows, and the column names will sort of categorize each bit of information, if you like. So let's say one of the column names is the item name. So it would say select all from I can't remember the name we said here now, let's say furniture, where table name equals whatever the user has inputted or clicked on, which in this case is going to be table. So if we go to here, which I have an example of, so I have a database that's got two tables in. It's got one for users, one for items. This is a very basic SQL statement or query, which is basically saying select all from the table name items, and that is the result. So you can imagine that this is the website. So anything from results down is the website, and these are their items. So you can see one column here, and then this row here. So columns item name has all the information here. Next column item description. Next column price. So we've also got the other table, which is users, and that has a list of users. So if for example the website allows you to make an account, then your details will go into this table, the users table. IDs, one column, username and password. So that is a very basic SQL query. So going back to our example here, so the user wants to see the table. All he wants to see is information about the table. So what typically would happen is you'd have select all from items, where item name equals table. And you can see that just returns the table. So what this is doing is it's saying select all the columns from the table called items, where the item name is whatever the user has put in. And in this case the user has either typed or clicked table, which has matched this, and it's then returned all the information. So the danger with this is this last section here, which is something that the user essentially can control. So if there's no validation and no filtering, the user, whatever the user types in, will be added into here. So if it was, even if it's a button, to be honest, even if it's a button that says table, they can use something like burp which we'll go through in another video. They can intercept the request and they can add whatever they want to into that. So this is where the danger comes in. So this pulls from one table. So you could narrow this down a little bit. So let's say you only wanted to display the price, didn't want to display anything else. You could say select price, so select that column, and the rest of it stays the same, and it's going to still query the items table, and it's still going to ensure that the item name column, because they still exist, just because they're not displayed here, the other two columns still exist. It's going to query that column for this input here, which is table, and all it's going to bring back is the price, and that's all you can see here. So we're just going to put that back to that. So you've got another thing called union, and what union does is it joins two selects together. So it enables this one here, this first one, to query data from one table, and then whatever you put in after that will query from another table. So it's the same principle. So select again all from users, and that's actually. So if we run that, you can see that we have our original return here, but then we also have the contents of users. But you notice that these here are still from here because this was the original query. So all it's doing is it's just grabbing this and it's just adding it inside these columns. Now that means that because it's basing it off these here, this return needs to be the same amount of columns. So if, for example, let me just, I'm not going to delete that, but I'm just going to comment it out. So 2 dashes is a comment. So this here, this code is no longer valid. It's not going to read it. Okay, it's just a little comment. So let's say we wanted two columns to be returned, 2 bits of information. You wanted the item name along with the price. So if you run that, again, the item description is still there, it's still inside the database, but we don't want it returned. So all we're asking for is the item name and the price. So this now on the website displays 2 columns. So now what happens if we try to run this again when we're asking for all the columns, which we know that there's 3 columns. So we know when we looked at it earlier that you've got an ID, a username and a password. So if you run that, you get an error which even tells you that they need to have the same amount of columns. So what we can do is we can just type it in. So we can say username and password. So now that matches because there's 2 columns, 2 columns here, 2 columns here. So let's say we didn't know the name of these columns. So we didn't have a clue the name of these columns yet. We're going to find that out a bit later on. Now, if we wanted to just verify how many columns there are available, we could just put null and null there. And you see that it doesn't bring results back because we've not specified what columns, but it gives us an idea of how many columns we can actually request. Because don't forget, you're not going to see this because this is on the back end. You're not going to be able to just read this. I've only put this here just so that I can explain it. So the bit that you're going to see and can have control over is this bit. So if you take all this bit out, this first section here, and you start crafting an SQL injection, you're not going to have a clue how many columns are going to be returned. A lot of the time you can perhaps have an educated guess by looking at the website, looking at the actual result coming back from this first bit. Sometimes you can do that, but if you can't just put all, because this is only returning 2 columns, and by putting all, we're asking for 3 columns to be returned from the users, which is ID, username and password. So that's not going to work. So let's say we can start from 1, we can say null, and we still get an error. So we know, okay, it's got to be more than 1. We put 2, that's it. And then you just keep on doing that. So if at 2 we received an error, so let's say we do also decide that we want item description. So now we've got 3 columns being displayed, but only 2 here. We get that error. So now we can just go put another one in. So now you know, bear in mind again, you're not going to see this bit here, but now you know that there is 3 columns that can be returned by injecting this. And then from there you can do more investigation into the actual names of the columns, which I'll show you in another video, just because that's more part of the exploitation bit, which I'm not trying to do in this bit. I'm just trying to explain to you the basics of SQL. So I suggest, if SQL is something that you've not ever played about with or seen, I suggest spend a little bit of time with it. You don't need to be a master at it at all, but you can come to w3schools.com, click on SQL at the top, and this is a really good site to give you enough of an understanding. So you can even, so for example here I have created my own database for this example. So if you click on any of them, so I don't update, let's say, scroll down, they will have a try it yourself section, which just basically brings up what I was on. This will be different for you. So the database is stored on the browser, if you like, as a cookie, I'm assuming. So it'll be different for you. So you can actually delete, if you don't know how to delete them, you can go delete here, or this is drop here. So drop table. So I could use this one to then get rid of items, or whatever the default ones are if you wanted to set something up a little bit more specific to your case. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better understanding. This will typically be hard coded in, so whenever you send a request to view a table, let's say, this bit's going to send regardless, and then it's whatever you put in after. So a malicious person could obviously enter that along with all of this if there's no filter or validation, which would then start to return information that perhaps that the company doesn't want you to see, and it would display it on the website. So the next video we're going to take a look at a very basic SQL injection, as well as a few other ones. We're not just going to look at one, we'll look at a few different ones, but I'll try and start off with the simplest ones, and then we'll build up from there over a few more videos. But hopefully that's given you some idea as to how SQL works.